Hi everyone, welcome to the video for the Festival of Samhain and the season of Samhain. Um, this is one of my favorites. In fact, I've kind of noticed that as I travel through the wheel, I keep thinking, oh, this is my favorite season. And then I come to the next season and the next festival and I think, oh no, this is my favorite. So that's what happens when you do the wheel over and over, which is one of the invitations of the wheel, is to be able to inhabit and have not one preference as such. But I think Samhain holds a very special place in my heart because it was where I entered the wheel first, and where I found the teaching around darkness, and that was the balm for my soul. So I'm delighted to share it with you today. So let me start with the date, just the date. The date of Samhain is the fixed date. So in each of the festivals, there's a fixed date and there's an astrological date. The fixed date of Samhain is October the 31st, which means it's the same every year if you go by the fixed dates. If you go by the astrological date, it changes slightly. It's usually in and around 6th, 7th, 5th, 6th, 7th. And that's to do more with the moon and the solstice and the equinoxes. So again, it's you decide which one works better for you. I celebrate sometimes both of them. Sometimes I celebrate the fixed day, but we'll be celebrating them. The festivals, if you're a wisdom holder or a wisdom carrier, we'll be celebrating the festivals at different times. So it's the fixed date is the 31st, and it is the new year. So it heralds the end of one cycle and the beginning of the new cycle. And as you will find out as you move through the wheel, yes, we're in a circle, but actually what happens as you do the wheel and go around in that cycle and cyclical way of moving through the seasons, actually what happens is Samhain becomes every time you come to the end of one cycle and enter a new cycle, you're actually moving into a spiral. So if you've done the wheel before in the last year, then you are moving deeper into the cycle. If this is your first time, then you're beginning that circle. And by the end of the cycle, you will come into the spiral. So just want to say that it's the end of one, it's really marking the end of one cycle and the beginning of the new cycle. It's also the doorway into the feminine part of the year. This is like so important in our journey as women. So this is the start of what's called. Let me go back a little. So if you remember from the introductory video, the wheel, the calendar, the wheel is divided into two parts. There's the dark part of the year, which is the Gammas part of the year, and then there's the light part of the year, which is the Samos. So the dark part of the year starts at Samhain, and it goes right through until Bealtaine, so the opposite festival. And then this is where the feminine principle is dominant. And this is why it's so important for us women. And this is the heroine's journey for me is about moving deeply first into the feminine, deep reclaiming of the buried feminine, which we in the modern world is so absent. And then as we reclaim the feminine, as we spend half the year with the dominant feminine, then what will happen is that the masculine will arise naturally rather than this forced over efforting. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. It's not that we stay in the darkness for the whole of the half of the year, but we do drop deeply into the darkness in this first season. And then little by little, the masculine will come back in small ways. But right now, we're really moving into the dark of the feminine. Samhain is itself is called, what it means, the word means, is 3 days at the end of summer. And this was a really important piece. 3 is a very sacred number to the Celts. It's the Trinity, it's the polarity, and the third thing that arises. So again, you'll be hearing that a lot through the year, but I just wanted to let you know that Samhain, the word itself, means 3 days at the end of summer. And we'll talk about that a little bit later because it is when there was a lot of festivities for these 3 days, so around Samhain. So let me talk about what's happening in nature, because we know the wheel is really based on the cycles of nature. So what's happening in nature, if you're in the northern hemisphere and you're particularly in the areas around the Celtic nations in this part of the world, you will be experiencing, you will see in front of you in the natural world, there is death is here. Death is the leaves. You can see them. The trees are letting go. They're surrendering their leaves to the earth. There is death all around, and we can see that in all of the nature around us. It's not in its full tilt at this point, but it's really beginning to announce itself. What else? Oh yeah, the life force is actually, so if we think about the life force in summer is like wild and strong and pulsating. Now the life force is actually moving inward and downward. So it's descending back into the earth. So the life force is very much the masculine energy. And in nature, that life force has been pulled in. As it's pulled in and down back into the earth, for this time of hibernation, for this time of rest, then that's why there's death in the leaves, and death in the flowers. And I've noticed in the last couple of days, the last rose has finally let its petals go in my garden. So death is here; it's all around, and that's a really important piece. In terms of the nature and the Celts and the tribe, this was a time when the farming came to an end. So it's a really important time. There's in the folk tradition, or in the folklore around this time, we would never pick the berries after Samhain. You'd never pick berries, and you had to have the apples off the trees before Samhain, because if you didn't, there was a superstition all around that basically the evil fairies, or the puka, would have would no longer would affect the fruit that would be picked after Samhain. And it was really an indication of the honoring of, there's a time to complete and a time to just put the tools down and move into the rest. So the earth is no longer supporting the tribe and the land working together. The earth is saying it's time to rest. It's time to go in. So this really marks that whole, that agriculture, farming is over. Put the tools down, clean them, put them away. We've just done that in the last season, and now it's time to rest. They're all stored and housed. The cattle, the livestock are brought in. And so this is, again, that sense of the time of doing is over, and the time to rest and fallow time is here. So that's the nature. And then in terms of the mythology, the veil is thin. That's one of the big pieces in the mythology, that the veil, this is a time when the veil is thin. So if we go back to the 3 days at the end of summer, so at this time, there was great festivities. The veil is thin because, so there is, in the mythology, there's, mortals and heroes had access to the other world, and they could move between, and then the monsters and the pukas are like ghosts in Irish. The pukas could also come back and be among the living and among this world that we know of. And then our ancestors was a very big piece in the folk tradition. So the ancestors were on around those 3 days of Samhain. Our ancestors would come and return to the houses that they had grown in or had grown up in, and so our dearly departed, often what happened was people left food out for them, just to welcome them and say, we honor the fact that you're here. So that's a really important piece. People would leave food also sometimes at the fairy trees, the white thorn or the black thorn are fairy trees in Ireland. And they would leave food there to appease the spirits. So there's a lot in the mythology. There's both kind of the spirits that are more like the puka, which is the evil spirits, a lot of superstition around that. But then there's also the piece around the ancestors, which there was a lot of honouring and appreciation for the ancestors. So we know in the folk tradition then, so the mythology is really based on the myths that were handed down in Ireland. They particularly were handed down. There's a rich reservoir of mythology, because in the when the Christian saints arrived in Ireland, they worked with the Druids and the Fillies, who were the storytellers in the Celtic tradition, and they worked with them initially anyway, and they wrote down all of this oral tradition. But they did kind of put a slant on it often around that had a kind of more Christian slant. So, but there's what's important here is that the mythology is so rich in Ireland because we have that written record that is missing in a lot of the other Celtic nations or Celtic areas. They're there, but not as rich as Ireland. So that's the mythology, but then the folk tradition, which is more what remained of these traditions within communities, right down until, the last century, right in my childhood. And right now with Samhain, it's still here, because Samhain was the basis of Halloween. In the folk tradition, there were bonfires lit, people wore masks because you couldn't tell who was the living and who was the dead, and they wanted to protect themselves, so they wore masks. They built big bonfires to ward off evil, but also to ward off the darkness too. So you can see the origin of Halloween actually comes from this festival, and then more in the Christian times, what we see, what is left of this now, is All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day are on November 31st of October and November the 1st. So this is a really good example of how the Christianity often absorbed a lot of the feast days and the rituals around the pagan rituals. And that is something that we'll be seeing over and over through the wheel. So, talking in terms of the symbols around Samhain, some of the symbols. I mean, I think the biggest symbol for me, well, there's a couple of big symbols, but the one that really resonated with me most, particularly when I was going through my own Samhain, was the Cailleach. So this is the face of the goddess at this time in the wheel. The Cailleach is the hag, the hag and the crone, and she's pretty ugly. I mean, the witch is based on the Cailleach. She's pretty ugly, but in a way, she's not a witch in the way that we contemporary culture would see the witch as something that's pretty evil. It's actually, in the mythology, there's a story about Fionn McCool, who was one of our great warriors, and as he came with his band of warriors across, he came to a stream, and there was a woman, an old hag woman, sitting at the stream, and said, "You cannot cross unless you kiss me." And his band of warriors, one after the other, said, "Not a chance, like, I'm not going near her." And Fionn walked up, as he was the warrior and had the wisdom. He walked up and kissed her, and she turned into a beautiful maiden. And this is the story that reflects the movement from Samhain to Imbolc, the spring. Because what happens is the face of the goddess changes from the Cailleach at Samhain to the maiden, Bridget the maiden at spring. So the beautiful metaphor here is, if we let the Cailleach have her way with us, if we let the Cailleach kiss us, if we let her, and the Cailleach will shake you to the core and say, what do you need to get rid of? What is no longer serving you? What needs to die? She'll say things like, you cannot live like this anymore. And if you let her shake you and let her, in a way, I often think of it, it's like grandmother love in the Buddhist tradition, or fierce grace. It's like she comes along like she does walk the land in winter, and you see her in the frost, and you see her in the wildness of the winds and the storms of winter. That's the Cailleach, because she shakes the leaves off the trees finally takes every leaf that there is on the tree. And that's what she does in our lives. And she is that dark goddess who comes, and she, if you let her have her way with her, use how I feel about it, I just let her work me. And this is part of what we'll be looking at in terms of the inquiry. If you let her have her way with you, she will transform what no longer serves and will bring gifts of spring, bring new gifts into your life. And that has absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, that has been my experience of working with this force, this energy. So she's like her sister Kali in the Hindu tradition as well. I mean, even the sound, if you think about it, and the Celtic language is Indo-European, so it has that. It is connected to the Indian. So Kali is the Hindu goddess, and the Kalyak is the Celtic goddess. And just see if you can get your tongue around the Kalyak. It's really important. I think even if there's a sense of like onomatopoeia when I say it, it's like it moves my whole body when I say the word Kalyak. So I think the language here is really important to attune to the Celtic consciousness. Even if you've never spoken a word of Irish or Gaelic, just tune into it. So Samhain and Kalyak, it's a beautiful language. So what's important? So that's one. That's one symbol. The other really important symbol is one I've prepared earlier, is the cauldron, or the void. And it's the goddess, the cauldron of the goddess. And it's the symbol of transformation. Really important. And we allow ourselves to surrender into the cauldron, so that in the fire of Samhain, and with the water and the fire of Samhain in the cauldron, are aspects of ourselves that no longer serve us. Whatever it is we put in for transformation, whatever we let go into the cauldron, it will be transformed. And the cauldron is a really strong and important motif in the Celtic tradition. And the other is the womb, the whole idea of, again, gestation. So the darkness is, this is where everything starts, in the darkness. With the Celts, they really honored this sense of, we think about our own existence, like we started for 9 months of gestation in the waters, the dark waters of the womb. And this is what we enter. We enter the dark waters of the feminine time, where, just like nature, everything is going underground. So we too are going underground. And in the womb, something transforms, something is formed that, if we didn't allow it to gestate, wouldn't ever have life. So that's the big invitation, is when the Kalyak shakes me and asks me, like, what is it that needs to change? What needs to die? And I have the courage to let go, or at least even begin to loosen my grip on that. It might be an aspect of yourself, it might be a relationship, it might be a way of being in the world, it might be a plan that a plan that you have. So, for instance, it happened to me. I had to let go of the dream of having kids. That was a really tough one for me. But I knew I came to a point, and I had to really work with that. So it's like I dropped it into the womb, ironically, and into the cauldron, and I let myself really feel the grief of that. And there's been lots of situations and lots of circumstances that I've done that in. So that's the second symbol. The other symbol is the apple, which we see in fairy tales all the time and in mythology. But the apple, again, it's a sign. It's a real. It brings us into the underworld. Often in stories of not the underworld, the other world. Often in stories of the other world, which is another motif, and we'll be looking at that through the year. The other world existed alongside this world that we know, and we'll look at that a little more. But the other world, which is what we have access to at Samhain, often The hero was given an apple by a goddess or a heroine, or given a branch of an apple tree. That's another motif. And the apple, or the apple blossom tree, the branch was the invitation into, and a portal really into the other world. So again, this is a really important symbol of the apple, and we'll be using that in the ritual. So those are the symbols. And then what's really important is that's all the description, the whole what's happening at Samhain. But what's really important in terms of how I work with it then is, well, how does this show up in my contemporary life? Because that's all fine and well, but how does it show up? What would Samhain look like in my life? So if you think about, we are going through the whole calendar of the wheel, which I have here. So we're going through that. This is where our journey, our sacred journey, is for the next year. But also what we learn at each time, at each season, at each festival, we learn particular energies that show up in our lives. So you might be in the middle of summer and have a Samhain moment. Samhain doesn't have to happen in October, November. This is a really important piece, and just bear with me on that. We'll be repeating that through the year, but I think I just want to make that point, because what we want to do is apply the energies of Samhain come into our lives at certain points. So say, for instance, when would a Samhain season come into our lives, or even a Samhain moment? And one of the key pieces at Samhain is your life gets disrupted. That's one of the times. So how does our lives get disrupted? It gets disrupted by loss. Somebody dies that's close to you, or a relationship ends, or you get fired from your job, or you choose to leave, or feel like, I can't stay here anymore. Or you have to let a dream go, like I had to let the dream of having children go. That's a Samhain moment, or Samhain season. The other way is, if you're lucky, and you're not such a slow learner as I've been in my life, it can be where the Cailleach just nudges you, and you get this sense of, something's not right. Like, I can't live like this anymore. And you start an inquiry. That's a Samhain moment too, because it's a disruption. You're looking at your life and saying, something's got to change. So if you're lucky, as I said, that's the Cailleach, a little nudge. And then those of us who don't listen to those nudges end up having like the Cailleach shaking us within an inch of our lives. So that's an important thing to just recognize, because the more I've worked with this, the more I've attuned myself to, okay, this is a Samhain moment, okay, and catch it while it's a nudge before it becomes the crisis. So that's a time when it can happen. And then what are we being invited to do in those moments? There's a challenge or an invitation in those moments always. So what we're being invited to do is to pause, just like nature is pausing now. It's like, okay, I just need to it's the Cailleach is asking me, just pause, and then ask, what is it that needs to die, or what needs to be let go of in this moment. So say, for instance, if you take that piece around me when I was really working with letting the grief of not being able to have children, I had to face that and look at, there's a part of me that needs to die, and the part that really wants to be a mother. So I worked very consciously with that. Equally, when a relationship ends, this sense of, what do I need to let go? Can I let go? So often we're so afraid to let go of relationships, and even just pause and take a step back and wait. We're so kind of enmeshed in our relationships that when they end, it's so hard to pull ourselves out and just, what can I even loosen a grip? Because often you can't just let go. It's too much. But if you ask yourself, okay, can I just loosen my grip here and just can't even imagine, but it demands that you stop. And then we're being asked to stay in the discomfort of that, because what happens is when you let go or even loosen a grip on something, but particularly if you let go and you surrender, which is a big theme at Samhain, actually what happens is you face emptiness of the void. Because when my father died, who am I without my father? Who am I if I'm not going to have children? I'm suddenly faced this void of this wasn't my plan, and now I'm in the unknown and in uncertainty. So that's the challenge, or the invitation is to to what needs to die is the biggest question, or what is no longer serving me. Can I let go of it? And then can I surrender into the not knowing? And can I stay in the discomfort? So it's really, those are the three challenges. The letting go, I just want to speak a little bit about the letting go, because as women, we know we shed all the time, we shed every month when we're in that cycle of the menstrual cycle. We are brilliant at shedding, and this is our great gift to the world. So that's why as we enter the feminine time of the year, and the feminine the time when the feminine principle is dominant, we are being asked to reclaim these amazing gifts we have as women and capacities, which is to shed. We shed our skin very easily. We shed all the time. So the shedding is the letting go. Can we shed all the doing? Can we shed our fear? Can we shed and just really move into the body and into the body mind, and know we can shed, and we can shed people that are toxic or situations that are no longer serving us. So the shedding, which is the letting go, the surrendering, and the staying. Those are the kind of three S's of Samhain that when I hit a Samhain moment in my life, I go, okay, what am I being invited to do? Stop, shed, and surrender. Much easier said than done, let me tell you. But anyway, the more we do the wheel, the more we'll get practice, the more this comes really naturally. And then how do we resist it in our lives? So that's a really important, because we're being invited or shook by the Cailleach. She's shaking us and she's inviting us. Come on, shed, come on, surrender, come on, stop. Much slower than that. She's the feminine, so she works very slowly. But then how do we as humans, and she socialized humans, and, we're so conditioned to be in fear and to have security and stability. How do we resist it? So we often resist it by staying in action, getting busy. We want to be over in spring without kissing the Cailleach. We want to be like, so I know for me, I went from one relationship that ended, I was like 6 weeks later in another relationship, or even less time than that. I couldn't bear to be with the void of my aloneness. And that's one way we resist it. Like, we go into busyness. Some people go into busyness. Some people, we're numbing out the discomfort of just the void. The void, like, we've dropped ourselves into the cauldron, and the void is like massive. And it's really hard for us to be, because we're so in the doing masculine mode. So that's one way we resist it. Check my notes. So I've said here, like, we want to fill the void, and we don't want to feel the discomfort, like the loneliness of a relationship ending, the panic of a health diagnosis. These are all the discomforts when we get disrupted. The confusion of a crisis. The sadness and grief of loss or death. We don't want to face the discomfort of the vulnerability of not knowing who you are anymore. And then the other way we resist it, as far as I can see, and it's kind of connected to the last, is we have this whole thing of, oh, I'll just get on with it, which is a real contemporary culture axiom. It's like, oh, we just need to get on with it. And what we're trying to avoid is the dropping into the depth of the darkness and of the descent, because this is where we're being invited to descend. And this is, as women, what is needed. In order for us to ascend, we must descend. That is the heroine's journey. It's different to the hero's journey. This is about, like, can I descend into darkness, into not knowing, there's nothing holding me, but can I descend? So we'll be doing that in some of the worksheets through the season. I want to talk about the planet, because I think this is a really important piece. As I see it, the planet is in Samhain. In fact, I would see it's in the season of Samhain, moving very close to the winter solstice, which is the dark night of the soul. So in Samhain, when we surrender, when we drop ourselves into the darkness and into the unknown, and let ourselves be thrown around by the Cailleach, we are being invited to move into the deep dark night of the soul, which is what a lot of us are really afraid of. But actually, in the moment, as we'll see, of the dark night of the soul at the winter solstice, the darkest night in the year, that is the moment that the summer solstice is born. So we're so afraid. That's why we resist the descent. We're so afraid to drop or to surrender, to let go. And as I see it, the planet right now is really close to the, if not in winter solstice, but very close to it. So I think it's really important for us holding, as wisdom holders and wisdom carriers and wisdom keepers and wisdom seekers, to really hold in ourselves that as we let Samhain have her way with us, or the Cailleach, that actually we're really contributing to finding new ways of what is wanting to emerge in the springtime of our planet, which will happen, I have no doubt. But just really sensing into, you are somebody, listen, as you're listening to this, you have some resonance with the Celtic world, and also the sense of, if you can work with the energies of Samhain, you are doing something for the planet. I have absolutely no doubt about that. And you'll see, watch what's happening. Like, everything in the planet has been disrupted. All the old structures are being disrupted. There's a great guy called Jordan Greenhall, which he now calls himself Jordan Hall, and he talks about game A and game B, and we're moving from game A to game B. So all the structures are falling. That's very masculine. They're falling. The church, you know, the judiciary, the politics, the climate, everything is disrupted. And can we hold and not go into fear? This is the gift of Samhain, is that we don't let fear have us. We have fear and we surrender and let the Cailleach do what she needs to do, so we can evolve as a species, and the planet is evolving, and we are ascending and evolving. And I'll just finish with the gifts of Samhain. So the gifts of Samhain are, every season has gifts as well as challenges and invitations. And the gifts of Samhain are that we start to recover our buried feminine. Every time we do this cycle and come into Samhain and we work with it, we're recovering our buried feminine, which is so lacking and missing in our world. It's a wonderful gift to have. This is a big part of our journey. And as we do that, we embody the values of the feminine, and we learn how to be deeply immersed and attuned to our feminine nature. And the second gift is that we honor the darkness. We learn to honor the darkness, which again is something quite countercultural, very countercultural actually. So we honor the darkness, and that's such a beautiful, beautiful way of being in the world. We know that darkness and loss is part of the cycle, and not the end, but in fact the beginning of the cycle. And we also learn how to rest and hibernate. We learn the importance of that in our lives. And this was, I know this has been big for a lot of women that I've worked with. In fact, the more they work with Samhain energies, the more they love being able to hibernate and feel that sense of going deep into the earth over the Samhain period, and they actually find it hard to come out, which is a whole other part of the wheel. So those are the three gifts of Samhain. So just to finish up, just my invitation to you is to really listen to this, let it speak to you, and see what resonates, what doesn't resonate. Is there anything that kind of touches you or tenderizes you? And just to take note of those. And then you'll be getting worksheets, and some of you will be getting practices through the season. So yeah, just really, really acknowledging that this is the start of the sacred journey as women on this journey for the next year. And honoring that as the beginning of the journey. And I'll just finish with this beautiful carving by a man in Ireland who's called, he's a wood carver. He used to be a butcher, but he's quite famous in the town I'm from, Sligo. And he carved this, and it's called "Where is the Wisdom Found?" And it's got lots of mythology all over it. I won't go into it now, but the most important thing is the wisdom is found in the darkness. So as he carves, he talks, he talks the mythology into the pieces. And when I saw this piece, I said to him, "What is this?" And he said, "Oh, that's one that I call Where's the Wisdom Found?" And then he went on to explain that the wisdom is found when we go into the dark waters of the unconscious, into the darkness of the feminine. So I'll leave you with that, and with my beautiful carving from a modern day filla, Michael Quirk. And I will see you at the next season.